Hey, this is Jason with ConveYour, and you're listening to episode 2 of ConveYour on learning and development. In this episode, I talk with Steve and Rhyne about the why of training, as in, why are we being trained? Steven says a missing piece in many training experiences is purpose. So check out this conversation that we recently had. Well, hey, Steven, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, man. Hey, so I'm just going to jump right into the conversation. And I've heard you say that regarding training, there's too much focus oftentimes on the information and too little focus on the psychology of the course. So unpack that for me in as much detail as you want or as little detail as you want.
So I started actually in sales. Like my first job was actually selling, Cutco knives. A lot of people have done that in college. And then fast forward many, many, many years, I started ConveYour, and it was working with speakers, thought leaders, and trainers that were doing a lot of marketing and marketing automation to sell their information online.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot about how to do online marketing, funnel building, writing good pitches and calls to actions and all of this stuff. And I'm really glad I learned all of that, because what I've kind of seen in the world of like corporate learning is that sometimes the idea of like you're selling your people on something seems like a no-no, or it's not considered anything in comparison to sales, but it really is. We're trying to sell a behavior, and that behavior is to get us to fill out a lead form or check out a sample, right, or purchase. And those are just behaviors. We're trying to convince somebody why it's important to them to move forward and take the action, to take the next step. And so what are companies trying to do? They're actually in sale or in training, at a company, you're trying to drive new behaviors, okay? Just like sales. So the behavior you're trying to get is a new understanding, okay? A new skill that they're going to use in the role, picking up a new approach to how you do your sales, or how you talk with your other employees, or how you talk to customers. Any of that, all of it's behavior modification and skill skill creation.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about any time you've actually finished, learned a new skill, okay, or wanted to learn something, it started with a really strong why. You had a motivation for doing it. Either it was a really strong curiosity to learn. Either it was that, like, you just intrinsically have always wanted to you had a curiosity about something. Somebody else, like somebody else around you is learning, and you feel frustrated that you don't know the information, right? Or you just feel like, oh man, they keep saying that word and I have no idea what that word means. I think of like a Friends episode where Joey doesn't know what these big words are, and so he reads like the V in dictionary, and he starts using all these V words. So
supposedly.
So exactly. So there's curiosity, there's peer pressure. We want that what is called social capital. So we want to be able to say, we want to be able to go on social media or go to our boss or go to our peers and say, oh, you haven't read the book yet? Oh my gosh, like you gotta go read the book. And so that's another motivation. Maybe the motivation is driven by pain, not just pleasure, but a personal pain. I'm tired of not knowing the answer. Every time we get to this point with the customer, I'm grasping for words. It's just painful, and I need to solve this. And sometimes it's just boredom. Like we're just bored, and we want to learn something that's kind of interesting to us. So there's all these reasons, but the what companies, and I've been trying to, we talked about this in the first episode, what companies are doing is they're kind of making this presumption that they have the attention of their people, like we talked about that, and that that people want the only why we need is that you work for us, right? And you need to do this because it's your job. Right.
For the money.
And to make money, to work here, you got to do this.
Yeah.
Or the worst is like, well, the why is it's the trainer's why, it's the company's why, not the learner's why. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's go back to sales. Let's use Cutco for an example, right?
Hmm.
Jason, I need you to buy these knives so that I can hit my quota, or I need to hit my bonus for the week, for the month.
Yeah.
I need to show my trainer that I can book this many appointments. So please get an appointment with me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want. Okay. It's
Yeah.
basic. Sometimes we just need to be reminded of this, but it's very focused on like how to win friends and influence people. We want somebody to do something for us, which is to engage in our content and learn the training and have the new behavior. But we are skipping past what it takes to set the hook with people.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let's get an example of corporate, like, okay, we have this issue where customers are coming in and they're confused about the fees that they have on their account, right? When they get
Hmm.
charged fees and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And this creates, this many hours of extra customer support, causing our bottom line to go down. That's a
Yeah.
why. That's a pain why for company trainer or division or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, that's a valuable why. I mean, I think a lot of employees can buy in to that why. I mean, a lot of employees do care about stuff like that. Like I do care about how the company does and how we're
Yeah.
operating because I'm a team player. But that's one-sided. That's like a myopic view of a why. The other why is, let's like actually think about this person that we're training that's sitting in front of a customer
Hmm.
and the feeling they get when the customer's frustrated. They're saying, but why? I don't understand this. And you can't articulate why it is. You just have to say, I don't know, that's just company policy.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to get at is that actual feeling, that actual emotion that the learner is feeling, right? So when you actually take the time in your course to say, hey, look, we're trying to solve this problem, obviously, for our companies, for our company to solve this efficiency problem. That's our
Yeah.
why.
Hmm.
But have you ever had this happen to you? And you identify, you label it, right? You say, have you ever had this happen to you when a customer comes in and you have the stress and this pain? It doesn't feel good, does it?
Hmm.
That is why we're doing this training, so that you can have a better day,
Yeah.
right? And you're like, well, of course. But no, with people are busy, you're taking you're asking them to take this time to learn this. You pushed it out to them. It's very surprising how often people just assume that people can remember that pain, and I re-identify it. So when you can highlight it, you start to create that hook. Now, you might be sending your course out to many different types of people, different stakeholders that have different buy-in requirements.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that you can do when you're setting up a training experience is go, who are all the personas that are going to be, that are going to be going through this? Again, this all comes from marketing automation. That's why we commonly call ourselves a training automation platform. Is in
Hmm.
marketing automation, you commonly ask, what do you care about? So there's two things where all marketers do to segment people. They segment based off of their persona, like what's your title, or they'll
Hmm.
segment based off of their job to be done, like what's painful for you, or what are you looking to solve in this quarter. And then they use that information to tailor the message to those people.
Yeah.
Okay, so in training courses, it's commonly not done. You just don't see anybody trying to tailor the messaging to the group that they're sending the training to.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to have it where the initial training experience, let's say like unit 1 or something like that, was a
Yeah.
little different depending on the type of learner. So if they're in the C-suite, the chairman or whatever, like he's getting that version that's like, hey, we're doing this so that we can reduce costs, right?
Yeah.
But if they're the
Yeah.
teller, they're getting a completely different message.
Hmm.
So it's aligning with that. Again, it's thinking more like a marketer and more like a salesperson. Our job is really to say, regardless of what I'm teaching, how would I build up a lot of kinetic energy, like a lot of potential energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
To hold their attention all the way through the course.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's considering that sometimes you're talking to people who need to hear the return on the investment, and sometimes people need to hear the bottom line.
Yeah, some people are looking on, well, what's the outcome that we're looking for as a company as a whole? Some people are thinking, well, honestly, I'm not really bought in on that. I just want to know how it's going to actually help me. I mean, I just kind of talk a little bit more about our business is, there's two big groups that, we talk to on a daily basis.
Uh-huh.
There's training and sales managers that are really just looking to make their life easier, make it easier to do training and development more quickly, more rapidly, with less fuss. And they just want their life to be easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are other people like, well, yeah, of course I want that. That's a given. That's table stakes. I'm looking for this thing that's going to change our organization and create a culture of learning. And it's just a much different, level of that they want to bite off.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And it makes one person glaze over if you start talking about these very like optimistic future thinking things. Like, no, my pain's now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is you're talking about essentially the necessity of knowing people and
Yes.
reading people at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah.
It does have the feel of the need to kind of come off of um, this is how we've always done it. This is what we do. This is our way, and so, I think like there's a generation of kids that have been raised kind of with that dad that's overbearing. This is the way you're going to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and they need somebody to sit down and say, well, this is exactly why we do it. Right. I hear you saying that. But at the same time, it sounds a dad doesn't want to just be buddy. So how do you find that line? So you want people to focus on the psychology of the course. So how then, what can trainers do? What can leaders do, managers do to kind of balance that? I don't know if that's a good question. I don't know if we even want to go in that direction, but what could they do you think, to balance between those two of both? Because you don't want to lose the DNA of the company,
Right.
or the tradition of the company. Some traditions you want to cling to,
Mm-hmm.
but you also want to meet people where they're at. So
Yeah.
how have you seen that play out?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, because really what you're saying is like, I want to reinforce these cultures. Like, I want to reinforce these core values that we have,
Yeah.
and they're not going to change. I mean, these are our core values. This is how we've done it. We know this works. We're not
Mm-hmm.
asking for your input.
Yeah.
What we're trying. So if you have a core value, or you have a way of doing things that has worked, I'm not saying, what I'm not saying is change the content.
Okay.
Okay. I'm
Yeah.
not saying, I want to know from you if you think the way we're following up with customers is the correct way. It'd be
Yeah.
good to have open, get open response and listen to feedback. Okay. Because that creates a culture of feedback and open discussion. But it's what I'm talking about is having that not heavy handedness, without ever actually, um, ex- with presuming that they would not understand the why.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we
Yeah.
say, you know what, okay, there's a big difference between, you're going to follow up with your customers this way. You need to make sure you follow up with a lead within 30 minutes or 60 minutes. That's our company policy. Do it or you're fired. Or that's a very, very heavy handed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
it or there will be consequences. Versus, you know what, obviously you carry quota. You're a sales rep,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm using a lot of sales examples because it's easy for me. But you carry quota. You want your job to be easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want you to earn well. And so guess what? Research shows that if you follow up with a lead within 60 minutes of it coming in, you're way more likely to get on a call with them, and way more likely to get a deal. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is one of the best ways for you to be more efficient. That's why
Definitely.
we have it.
Yeah.
So you see how I just flipped it around, where it's all about them. It's all
Hmm.
about how it's going to help their business, their career, not like how it's our policy and we've been doing it this way for a long time. And then a lot of times it's basically presuming that they wouldn't understand the objection. So think about all the objections of like why somebody wouldn't finish this course, or they don't have
Hmm.
enough time, why they might be scared to get any questions wrong if it's difficult. Like
Hmm.
all of those things, you can write down the arguments that would cause somebody to be fearful. And then you say, look, here are some examples of the things I know that are going to pop up as you're going through this course. They're going to
Yeah.
stop you from finishing it. Right? Your boss is going to say you need to do this other thing, and he's just forget about that, right? Or
Yeah.
whatever. And so you're basically handling all the objections before they get to the meat of the content. And handling objections up front is a common blank tactic,
Hmm.
sales tactic, right?
Oh, yeah, I
You
was
handle,
saying
yeah, you
sales.
handle sales,
Sales.
like, yeah, you handle
Sales.
sales. You do upfront. You do this upfront work of handling, objections before they come up. Okay.
Definitely. So, Stephen, we've talked about, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer that people they just say yes. They like to say yes to things. Hey, would you like to learn more about this? And they go, oh yeah, great. Click, change the channel, right? So, there's a difficulty in getting people to actually say yes and mean yes, and then there's a difficulty. The further one is to get them to say yes and that they'll actually commit to doing it and doing it in a certain amount of time. So how do you navigate that? How do you help somebody not just say yes, but then say yes and they're going to complete it within the time set that you have for them?
Right. Okay. So the first thing, let's just take some of the things I've said before and talk about, and then add the time aspect to it. Right.
Okay.
So you've got, let's say you've gone through, you had a little video or some text where you've talked about the value, the benefits that they're going to have as the type of stakeholder they
Mm-hmm.
are, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And then your objection could be like, okay, great, maybe you're bought in by now, and you can see that this content's going to be fantastic for you, like it's going to really help you in your role. But you're saying, well, I've got a lot of other things to, and this is so simple, right? But it's like, maybe you're just saying, well, this is great, but I'll put it on the to-do list.
Yeah.
And so this is where you can start talking about the actual content, like the syllabus, right? And then what the capabilities that they're going to start getting as a result of being exposed to this content early on. Okay? Paint them a picture.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say something like, well, it's not like you're just only going to get value at the end of completing this. If you focus, there's going to be this many people going through this together. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Build up the hype it up a little bit, right? There's going to be other, like all the other people are going to finish by X date. And as they're going through it, this is social proof, right? You're using social proof. As they're going through it, within the first week, they're going to get way better at this, right? In the first week, you're going to be able to do better than you ever have been able to do before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I bring this up, like, I just I hired a great company to help me hire a personal assistant. Okay. And they had fantastic content that would roll out as I'm working to hire an assistant. And they kept showing like examples of, this is what you're going to be able to do. This is where you're going to be able to free up time. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of times I think that learners go, that sounds scary to get involved in that. I'll go in there and start working on it. But it's one of these all or nothing things. Like, well, I'm either on this side of the fence or I'm on that side of the fence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you say, look, this is 30 days worth of content, it's either you start now and you start getting those capabilities now and you start getting lots of value, and it's only this much time per day. Okay. Imagine where you're going to be in 30 days from now. Okay.
Yeah.
Rather than waiting and all your other buddies have already done it and you're here and you haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
So it's like sometimes those discussions of you not doing something or not being compliant is scary to even bring up for companies, I think, because the even very mention of not being compliant, like as if you have a choice and you're not going to get in trouble for waiting 2 weeks before you start working on this. The
Yeah.
very mention of that is like suggestive that they're not going to do it. Does that make sense?
It does.
So it's bringing that up and then trying to show them where they can fit this into their calendar and start getting value right away from it. The best marketers, best infopreneurs have already been doing this. And so if you can see, I'm just trying to bring that world into an area that's really been more focused on this idea of a captive audience learning. So do you remember when we were talking about Karate Kid? Like waxing the car, right?
Wax on, wax off.
We were talking a little bit about that, like, well, why did he keep doing it? So he had no explanation as to why he was supposed to wax that car by Mr. Miyagi. And we were going, well, what motivated him to keep going? Because really there was no explanation. There was no preface as to why he was waxing the car. So what kept him going doing that? Like we've been talking for a while about the why and why it matters so much. So if that was the course of learning how to block, right? Why did Mr. Miyagi have no preface to that?
Yeah. Great question. Why didn't he? What's interesting is like Daniel's there to learn karate. So he's got this lingering why behind the scenes, and but yet you see him frustrated until Miyagi shows him. So he's going to bail because he's going, all this why of being here is it's really stupid. This guy's not teaching me anything. He's just getting a free car wash, right? And it's not until Miyagi actually pulls him aside and starts swinging at him, right? Wax on and swing, and paint the fence. And then he goes, holy crap. I've actually learned and built muscle memory. And yet he wouldn't have seen it, right? He would have been just this dumb punk kid who's like, he just wouldn't have done it. Come on, kids these days, right? Even in those days.
Right.
So, but he did. He had the why, right? We were talking about that? He had a why that he didn't want to get his teeth kicked in.
Right. Yeah, right. He had a really strong why. I was just going to add that the reason why Mr. Miyagi had, I don't know why we're using this example, but it's a good example. Like Miyagi had a ton of leeway with Daniel at that point because he had such a strong hook. Like Daniel had a really strong hook. He was, getting messed with other kids. And I think at that point he had seen Mr. Miyagi do his thing a little bit. Yeah. Right. So he's like, okay, this guy knows his stuff. I don't know how, this is really weird. He's making me do this work, but he's got the hook set. He's curious. He's curious how this has anything to do with what he's doing, his work. He has deep motivation to remove a pain of getting messed with. And he's got the with aspirations to be like Mr. Miyagi. Right? So sometimes the best why is just to add to this, like another why is showing your trainees what the outcome looks like. When you get somebody that's really good at talking to customers and you watch a video of them, how they've been working with customers for years and they're super confident and easy, that's motivating, right? That's a really aspirational why, instead of just, hey, get rid of this suck of being uncomfortable talking like with customers about this, to that, I want to be that, like I want to get there. So that's a great example of with the Karate Kid. I like that a lot.
It is. I think about being in, working for companies, and you have conferences to go to. And I specifically remember a handful of times I went to conferences where, you just kind of go because like all the guys are going, right? And might have happened a couple times where at conferences it's like, hey guys, let's go see Captain America. I went and saw Captain America, right, at a conference when I should have been in a class. But I went and watched it because at the end of the day, nobody was testing me on the material. Nobody was asking me if I was utilizing the information. It was just kind of given to you like, I'm the expert, take this material, and you're gonna commit the material to memory because I am who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, that wasn't really a motivator for me or for the guys that I was working with my team. We just were like, this is boring, let's bounce. So
yeah.
And so I guess you're saying good trainers are actually going to implement the usage of the information that you're learning from them.
Yeah.
But you're also going to test them on the material. Because if I had known that there were a test, I would have bore through it if somebody just was going to quiz me on the material.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's a big difference between being motivated to finish a course. Okay. Motivation to finish a course because, the stick, is whipping me to finish it.
Yeah.
And get that off my plate. Check the box, right? Be compliant. Help the trainer out. Okay. And then there's a big difference to be motivated to even apply any of the material.
Yeah.
And you can see that there can be a perverse motivation driven by the motivations of the trainer.
Yeah.
Okay. Because if their only win, right, is to show people are taking this, people are completing it, all right, and they're not incentivized to do anything else other than that, that's what you will get.
Yeah.
Okay. If in your content you can say, hey, you're going to go through this and we're going to stick with you. We're going to help you. This is going back to like how it's about them. Not only are we going to have you go through this initial content, but we're going to help reinforce, these, this concept later on. So later on, in a few weeks from now, we're going to do a follow-up, which you can do pretty easily with ConveYour, hint, hint, like, do follow-up text messages and stuff. We're going to ask you to pop in and tell us about your progress, how you're implementing the content. And that sets up that expectation. It's an assumptive close, another sales tactic. You're making the assumption that that's going to happen. You talk to your people, not who they were or who they are now, but who they should be or who they are becoming. Right.
Yeah.
And it makes them rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Another great way to help make it so it's not this perverse motivation just to finish is it's one thing to internalize a why, like identify whys for people and have them write them down, or have them think about them. It's another thing, and this comes back to this book with by Robert Cialdini. I hope I'm saying the name right. Who wrote Influence?
Yeah,
it's a great book on psychology, but people want to be congruent with their words. Okay, so if you can ask them, okay, how is this going to help you? I've talked about it, and I've said, why don't you, in your own words, write out how this is going to help you in the next month? What are you going to be able to do in the month? How does this change your goals, right? And as people write that down, just physically writing, we've all heard lots of research on this about writing goals down and things like this. Just writing it down, even if you could resurface it to them later, how's that going? It just has a huge impact, like on their push through it, because they've made that internal commitment to themselves by writing it.
Hey, thanks again for listening in on this discussion. For more information about ConveYour, check out ConveYour.com or podcast.conveyor.com. You can also search for us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Also, be sure to check out our next episode where we release an interview between Stephen Rhyne and innovation instigator Steven Shapiro. Steven Shapiro is known for being a thought generator and has worked with NASA, Nike, Johnson & Johnson, as well as many other well-known companies. So again, be sure to check out this next episode to hear him talk about innovation. Until next time, keep up the good work.